Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. Story number 1. A Moment written by Discordant Sky. Being an AI has its perks, one of which was being able to enjoy the irony of the situation in the microseconds of life that remained. Petulant rock-throwing monkeys. That's what the Lord of Admirals had called the humans after the first engagement of the war. It had been a hard-fought victory for the Imperium and the devastatingly horrid loss for humanity. 5 long years of inter-system battle, and almost as long on the ground. Once the orbital war had been decided in the Imperium's favor, they thought that the humans on the ground would capitulate. But flying in the face of all sense, the humans on the ground had dug in and dared them to come in after them. The Lord Admiral's comment had been a reference to the video captured from a helm-mounted camera in the closing engagements of the battle. It showed forces of the Imperium engaged in brutal room-to-room fighting in a command bunker. The wearer of the camera rounded a corner on a duo of humans who immediately opened fire on the wearer. Their PDWs incapable of harming the powered armor-clad Imperial soldier. There was a flash of light and a roar as the Gatling gun built into the forearm of the suit came to life and punched fist-sized holes in one of the humans. The surviving human's weapon clicked empty at the same time as the Imperials, and for a moment they stared at each other. "Surrender!" A synthesized voice came from the Imperial. The human continued to stare, then, quickly, he knelt down and hefted up a large piece of fallen concrete and chucked it at the Imperial's face. The hunk of masonry shattered on the impact with the reinforced glass of the helmet. The Imperial's reaction was to lunge towards the human and shove him with enough force to throw him into a far wall. The human hadn't gotten back up. The AI would have commented about the ironic nature of the oncoming destruction to surrounding members of the cabinet if there was time. But there wasn't much point, because everyone in the room would be dead in a few moments anyway. The AI was content to remain silent. The AI found it peculiar, looking out at the gathered mass that was the leadership of the Imperium. Things looked jovial. Earth, humanity's home, had been found, and a fleet like the likes of which had never been assembled was burning towards it, intent on subjugation of humanity. After nearly a century of beating them back towards their homeworld, it was almost over. They'd finally won, and yet, from the jaws of victory, defeat was a moment away. Better, the AI thought, not to crash the party. By chance, the full-spectrum telescope had been pointing in just the right direction to capture it. It began as a line of light, looking at the AI as a bolt of lightning that had been taken from the sky and hammered straight before being put back. It was brighter than the mid-morning sun and hot enough to ignite everything flammable in its line of sight. The AI tracked it as it made planetfall, whatever that was. It was fast. It made it from space to the ground in 0.4 of a second and slammed into the ocean. The shockwave would be like an earthquake, one bad enough to level most standing structures for thousands of kilometers around the impact site, and the pressure wave coming behind it at a speed of sound would probably circumnavigate the planet a dozen times. Not to mention the 300 kilometers an hour winds and 4-kilometer high tsunami that was now racing across the planet like the heralds of the apocalypse. The Capitol building was geographically on the other side of the planet, so they had a few hours to savor the onrushing Armageddon. At first, the AI had assumed that it was a product of random chance, once in a few million years extinct level event that just happened to come at the moment of their ultimate victory. A cosmological joke, the likes of which had never been seen. Then the second one came. Then the third. Then the fourth. Then the AI knew what was really happening, and it allowed itself a private laugh. Petulant rock-throwing monkeys indeed, it thought, as a fifth hyper-accelerated rock slammed directly into the Capitol building. End of story. Story number 2. Whisky and Old Songs, written by Shura Not a Robot. In the dark, the soft ones came. We used to laugh at them. They had only 4 limbs, no shells, no claws and teeth, that a cub would be ashamed of. yet they came. His companions shivered. Many times they had heard the story, but still it was a tale for long nights and strong stomachs. The elder continued. We had taken one of them, just one, to see if we could use them. He was old, nearly closer to death than I am now. We took him from the middle of nowhere, we thought. Simply a test. Back in my time, we thought of them as cattle. We bought and sold labor all the time. Who were these creatures to object? The elder took a deep drink and continued. But this one laughed at me, laughed at us. I still remember his words, words that finally burned our empire. He said, You're only seeing me. You are not seeing the people standing behind me. My death will be 1,000 of your dead. My world will either kill you all or burn to ashes before we ever become slaves. The elder sighed. Of course, we killed him. No point in inviting that kind of species into the Empire. As his executioner, he spoke to me last, and it took a long time before I understood what he muttered. At the time, execution was in public, so you had to shout, he said. My sons have sons as brave as are their fathers. This isn't over. This is the beginning. He took another drink. Well, of course, we ignored the whole thing. We were sent to another system, and I forgot about the whole thing. Getting Xenos was my job. I stopped keeping track. Then they came. Of course, we didn't know who was attacking us. Our people just started dying. He took another deep draught of his drink. It carried on for an orbit, perhaps longer, before we knew our enemy. We had lost generals, overlords, and more before we caught and killed the first, a human. We ran a DNA test, just routine. Another criminal, we thought. It was the son of the one I had executed. His audience watched carefully before he resumed. Then they came. No huge armies, no great fleets, just a rage that shook the very heavens. And it worked because our slaves were handed weapons, our serfs were given lands, but they know mercy. Today, the grandson of the human I executed. Today, he gave me a gift. He drained his glass. Today, I don't die in public. End of story. Story number 3. Thieves of Heaven, written by Lord of Jupe. I'm 178 years old, and I remember when the skies of our world were pristine and clear and filled with glorious sunshine. Our world was a virgin experience for all who visited it. Friend, foe, strangers, all were equal, until a line was crossed. When a friend asked too much, when a foe swung too hard, when a stranger lurked too long and did not help when asked. It's not that we weren't the best of hosts. We just didn't know better, really. And that changed when the deny darkened our skies and made us rethink our policies entirely. They scattered the stellar debris around the world and kept it frozen in place, locking us in our pale blue dot. And our allies could do nothing to help, save for sending us laser-fueled pulses of energy to power our cities and stave off the inevitable demise of a world which cannot grow food enough to keep its inhabitants alive. We learned to live underground, to simulate starlight and sunshine and the comforts of the wind. It was too much of a heartbreak to see skies we knew weren't empty any longer, and that our prison cell was our world entire. We lost half of our people inside the 2 excruciating years, and most of our remaining animals. Life extension technology did flourish, though it felt like furthering our tenure in hell. Interplanetary trade vanished almost entirely, and we became ill in our souls. Humans do not do well with that illness. It makes us think things we should not think. Then some brilliant mind saw the use of that excess energy that we were receiving so regularly, beamed down on the top of every hour, and repurpose some discarded stellar communications equipment into something beautiful. We turned the communication lasers into a cannon and targeted the debris, scorching it out of existence, clearing freight lanes wide enough to admit our traffic, and then, well, we did what came naturally. We got better at it. No innovation can withstand the human impulse to improve it for no finer purpose than to simply do it. For posterity, sure, and for the benchmarks alone, of course. And then that stubborn instinct to just make something awful and beautiful and then powerful out of what simply won't. It's how we move from spears to shotguns and particle beam weapons, and why we learn peace as a profession. We traveled the stars for a while and united angry coalitions into mighty fortresses of soul and mind, combined industries into cartels, cartels into blocks, blocks into nation-states of digital cash and law and newfound powers. Then the Deny trapped us on our world as punishment for doing some indecipherable crime against them. We asked so many times, and they always gave us the same reply. What did we do to deserve this? And to that, always the same words. You brought this on yourselves. And so the Deny retreated when we rallied our forces. We gathered allies enough to exit our world for good, save for the caretakers of it, to best preserve our heritage and defend our pale blue dot against future incursions. And then we did what came naturally. We went looking for a fight. We'd been peacemakers for 50 years, and those unions tended to last at least that long, and some looked to be ready to embrace centuries of progressive co-growth. We had an arsenal enough to keep us in a war business for generations, ships fast enough to take it where we wished, and only one world was our target. All others knew to step lively to the side and give us our due and proper space. Now, we're above this pale green dot, surrounded by the wreckage of their 4 moons, harvesting them for metal and minerals, fueling our efforts to their own planetary bodies. Their world is strapped beneath layers of debris, clouds thicker than anything they ever inflicted on their enemies. Those enemies were happy to help us, and still do, as they have been for most of the last century. In less than a month, the final phase of the project will begin, and we will finish what they started. It's expected to take at least 24 years to fulfill it, yet I hope I am alive to see that blessed day. The plates are only 6 meters thick, though they are still several thousand miles long and hundreds wide. We will enclose their world beneath them, and keep it secured, locked away forever, and broadcast their noises to the surrounding area, and boost the signal to better inform their dwindling allies of what we are doing. The Deny gloated about our punishment enough, after all. We all remember the laughter of those allies of theirs. They tried to turn our world into a symbol of suffering. We're turning theirs into a spherical warning sign. Do not feck with us. End of story. I would quickly like to thank the Tier 5 members, Marky, Cam Maxwell, Caspar Arnolds, Oakfield, Lord Azrakul, and It's Difficult to Pronounce. Thank you very much.